And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to the Turning Point for ITN Sri Lanka. And as I keep saying to you, the Turning Point is Monday to Friday daily, 6 to 6:30 p.m., mainly live discussion program. And we usually discuss the economy, which is what is on the minds of the people, and we bring in experts in that subject. Today we thought we'd discuss what could happen to Sri Lanka because of events outside of Sri Lanka. International events may impact on Sri Lanka for a variety of reasons, especially because our economy is still struggling and it's coming up on its way. Tourism is raising its head and so on. And so we thought we'd have a look at what's happening out there, just in case it can affect us in here. Let's see who our guest is this evening, but in the meantime, if you want to send us your questions, you may do that. 0772 300 305 WhatsApp or on SMS. Let's see who our guest is. And of course, it's Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka, former Ambassador of Sri Lanka to the UN in Geneva, to France, UNESCO, the elected chairman of the ILO, and a whole series of, he's a serial diplomat, really. And so, Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka, delighted to have you on the program for Turning Point.
Delighted to be here for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening to you. Everyone in Sri Lanka is talking of one thing, and Badu Mila Vadi.
Yeah.
The economy is real serious business.
Yes.
I have personally experienced this. I've traveled around the country on my own to conduct what I call an independent survey.
Yeah.
And I've just met quite ordinary people. And everyone talks about this business of the economy.
Understandably.
Quite a lot of people are appreciative of the fact that there is a sense of normality. In the sense, there are no fuel queues, there are no gas queues, there are hardly any electricity cuts, but, and the children are going to school, so the little ones are out of the way, but the cost of living. Now, in that context, Ambassador Dayan, I'd like to ask you, what are the potential impacts on Sri Lanka of what's happening outside? You know, our tourism is just coming back again. Every time we come up, there's some nonsense happening. You know, we had the Easter bombings, and before that we had something else, and then we had the COVID, and our tourism industry needs a lot of serotonin levels, you know, because otherwise they're going to be down in depression. So what potential impact can these events that's happening in the Middle East, which is of course awful. Sri Lanka has always been friends of everyone, enemies of none kind of thing. So what potential problems may fall on Sri Lanka?
Well, for us, obviously we are a relatively small island, that's one. Our economy is dependent on the world economy, and we are in the midst of a serious crisis, at the heart of which is the debt crisis. Therefore, we are triply vulnerable to external shock.
Yeah.
Now, instead of picking up on the Middle East or the Ukraine, let me just quote to you a term used by Dr. Jaishankar, India's foreign minister, when he said that the international system is in a period of churning. He said there's a churn going on. So there's turbulence. I agree totally. We have to understand that things are happening, very dramatic things, in a number of places. The Middle East, yes. Jake Sullivan was hoping 12 hours ago that the battles between the Hezbollah and Israel will not trigger off a regional conflict. We do know that the Ukrainian forces, armed by NATO, have thrust into Kursk, which is a border region of Russia. And we don't know what the Russians will do, but we do know they'll do something dramatic. So we could go around the globe and find hot spots.
Yeah.
But the point is that the entire world system is in a period of churn, as Jayashankar called it. So Sri Lanka, small island in the Indian Ocean, on the doorstep of India, is caught up in all of this because we have a competition for Asia within Asia. That is India versus China. Let's be very plain about it.
Yes.
India is also trying to process what's been happening in Bangladesh, the Maldives, and Pakistan. And there are some in India who see this as anti-Indian in some part. Now, apart from the fight or the competition in Asia, over Asia, as I said, India versus China, there's a global competition over Asia or the Asia Pacific. That's the United States and China.
Yeah.
With Russia pretty much on the Chinese side, and the Quad, India, Japan, Australia, with the United States, and then there's NATO in back of the United States. So this is a global situation of mounting competition, competition turning into contention, contention potentially turning into conflict. And here we are, this little island, right in the middle of all of this turbulent international weather. And then, of course, we have our debt crisis.
Indeed. That's a bit interesting. I hear what you say, of course, and we acknowledge this thing that we are a tiny island. But tiny island or not, we are in a pretty important location.
Yeah. A mixed blessing for us.
A mixed blessing. But I can't help notice, and I thought that with your expertise as ambassador for our country at the UN and so on, and your multiple ambassadorial roles, I thought I'd ask you to explain this one to me. I noticed that, you know, in Geneva, the people, they've always been talking since the war ended, they've been going on and on about accountability, restorative justice, and so on. I am not downplaying anything. I would rather first sort out the economy and then come to those things, but my question is not that. My question is this. I now notice that they're not talking about accountability so much for the war so-called allegations, but they are now having something new. They're talking about the economy. And I'm thinking to myself, really? Talking about the economy, we're going through, have they missed the point? We've declared a form of international bankruptcy. We are having we've had our own annus horribilis, not 1 year, but every year for the last few years. In between all that, they're now trying to force us to do whatever. It's almost like rubbing our noses in it. Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I reacting in the wrong way?
Well, Faraz, let me put it this way. It's not very new because the High Commissioner you now have is Volker Turk, who came up from within the UN system.
Yeah.
He's an academic, but from within the UN system. But the focus on the economy began with Michel Bachelet, his predecessor, who was the president of Chile, the twice elected president of Chile.
Yeah.
An experienced and respected politician, not an apparatchik or mere academic. What has happened for us is that, firstly, there has been an understanding, an expansion of the notion of rights from merely or primarily individual rights, political rights, legal rights, to socio-economic rights. So therefore, the socio-economic factors come into the discussion of human rights. That's one. Two, there is an understanding that within the UN system, that the world economy is asymmetric, and it's the poor who bear the brunt of that asymmetry. And this, of course, has been an understanding within the United Nations growing for decades. Our own Dr. Gamini Correa and so on have contributed to this awareness. So there's a sensitivity whenever there's an economic crisis as to whether the burdens are being fairly shared. And there's a sense that in countries like Sri Lanka, that's not the case. That the fat cats, as it were, are getting away with things, whereas the poor have to share the greater part of the burden of a crisis they didn't create.
So some of these fat cats indeed are getting away with almost financial blue murder. I notice with appalling disgust that the state banks are in a way forced to write things off.
Exactly.
It might be a commercial decision, but then it draws into question what on earth the lending committees, the risk committees in these banks were doing in lending these monies in the first place.
Absolutely.
And I think those people should be hauled up before some sort of court to be held accountable for letting the people down.
Correct. Because, economic accountability.
Yes, because they are holding these positions on trust for the people.
And if I may come back to Geneva and the UN system, the third and final point I want to make there, when talking about or tracking the shift in consciousness about rights, is that there is an understanding that when there is an economic crisis, human rights get impacted on negatively because governments try to hold down protest. On the one hand, there are more protests than before, and on the other, repression increases. So there is greater sensitivity, there's a spotlight that's shone on countries that are going through economic crises. And the UN system has, as you know, special rapporteurs, independent experts on various subjects. And there are now quite a few on socio-economic issues. And they produce reports for the UN Human Rights Council, for the General Assembly, for the Secretary General. And the boundaries are beginning to shift. That's why we have had from Michelle Bachelet's tenure, now through to Volkertag, the socio-economic being brought in to the discussion on Sri Lanka.
On that note, Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka, on that note, we'll go for a quick break, shall we, and have a look to see what the break holds. But we'll be back with Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka talking about what may impact Sri Lanka with what's happening around the world. We'll be back on The Turning Point shortly.
Now best ever sunlight. පෙරටත් වඩා සුවඳක් සමගින් සුපිරි සේදුමක්.
රුපියල් 50 මයිලෝ සැෂේක සමගින් දරුවන් දිනපතා පෝෂණයෙන් ඉදිරියට.
සමේ ඇතුළටම ගමන් කරමින් ඩාර්ක් ස්පොට්ස් අවම කරමින් දෙගුණ එක ග්ලෝ එකක් ලබා දෙයි. Glow and Lovely Serum Cream. ගුණ පරපුරක සහතිකය Anchor.
Kamuda machan, prima kotumi, fantamai.
ලක්ස් කියන්නේ සබන් ගැටයක් විතරක් නෙවෙයි සමට සංකාරයක් නව ලක්ස්
Prima Kotumi, Fantamai.
චාකෝල් සහ ග්‍රීන් ටී සාරයෙන් හිසේ සමහි ඇති විශවිජ 99.9ක් දක්වා විනාශ කරන ෆර්ස්ට් වොෂ් කොන්ෆිඩන්ස් සමගින් අඳුරවාගෙන නව ටැන්ටෙක්ස් ඩීටොක්ස් ප්ලස් ක්ලීනස් ෂැම්පූ.
දවස් 7ම ඔබත් දිනුම් රටත් දිනුම්. බලාපොරොත්තු සිහින ජයග්‍රහණ විශ්වාසය අරමුණු තැන තැන විසිරුණු ජයග්‍රහණයේ බලාපොරොත්තු එකට එකතු කළ ලංකාවේ දැවැන්තම සුපිරි ජයමල්ල ගෙනෙන කප්රුක මෙවර ජයමල්ල රුපියල් කෝටි 53ක් නොවා සංවර්ධන කරයි මණ්ඩලය.
සුභා ගුණයෙන් පෝෂණීය කෙස් කලමකට කුමාරිකා hair oil.
ග්‍රෑම් 160ක් ලංකාවේ වාසිම මෙලකට තියෙන පැක් එකක්. සිග්නල්.
බුද්ධිමත් ඇගේ තීරණය ප්‍රීමා ස්ටෙලා. අපි හැමෝම කැමති.
චාකෝල් සහ ග්‍රීන් ටී සාරයෙන් හිසේ සමහි ඇති විශවිජ 99.9ක් දක්වා විනාශ කරන ෆර්ස්ට් වොෂ් කොන්ෆිඩන්ස් සමගින් අඳුරවාගෙන නව ටැන්ටෙක්ස් ඩීටොක්ස් ප්ලස් ක්ලීනස් ෂැම්පූ.
Introducing Prima Kottami Korean Ramen.
Let's fire it up.
ද්විත්වාරක්ෂාවක් දෙන නව ක්ලෝගාඩ් නැචරල් සෝල්ට්.
වෙන්දට පරක්කු වෙලා ෂූටින් එන උඹ අද මොකද මේ කලින්ම ඇවිල්ලා ඈ අද පොඩ්ඩක් මේ උදේම ඇරුණාව
සඳුදා සිට සිකුරාදා දක්වා රාත්‍රී 8:30ට
ඩොක්ටර්ත් මගේ සුද්ධි වගේ කෙල්ලෙක්ව කසාද වැඳලා මට විච්ච මේ දේ වුණා නම් ඔහොම කතා කරන්නේ නැහැ.
නැන්දේ නංගේ ඔච්චර අනන්නේ.
මේ හැමදේම පිටිපස්සේ තියෙන්නේ ওই මිනිස්සයාගේ සල්ලි කියලා දැනගත්තොත් එහෙම මට බය මගේ නමටත් අවුලක් වෙයි කියලා.
රට හදන හැටි රටට කියන්න ජනපති අපේක්ෂකයන් වෙනුවෙන් වෙන්වුණු ටෙලිවිෂන් අවකාශය.
ජනරංජන සමග ජන අරගල සන්ධානයේ ජනාධිපති අපේක්ෂක නුවන් බෝපති කැඩපත
රනිල්ගේ ටීම් එක. අනුරලාගේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති. දුප්පත්කම නැති කරන සජිත්ගේ විසිදහස. බලුකිස්තාන අතිවේගී වෙඩිහඬ. දෙස්විවෙස් පුවත් රැසක් සමගින් හමුවෙමු සවස 6:30 අපගේ ප්‍රධාන පුවත් විකාශය සමගින්.
And welcome back to the Turning Point for ITN Sri Lanka. Our guest tonight, Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka. And honestly, a serial diplomat, all sorts of things, but a serial diplomat nevertheless. And once an ambassador, always an ambassador. Now, Dan, how, but really for the UN to sort of, I understand all this, but it's not like our government is not doing anything about it. They are. And they're fixing a faulty system, I suppose. Just because you announce new taxes and so on doesn't mean that our dear friends at the Inland Revenue are going to collect any more than from 600 files or whatever. But, you know, there are 1.5 million files. So why is the UN, shouldn't it be, instead of being a stick shouldn't it be a carrot?
But you need a watchdog for us. You need a watchdog. Now, I speak as somebody, and you might think it paradoxical, but it was only during my term in Geneva that we, Sri Lanka, won a vote on a resolution. They were hoping to bring a resolution against us. They had a special session 1 week after the war was over, and we moved down resolution and we defeated theirs and got almost a two-thirds majority. So I fought my battles at the UN, but I also value the United Nations greatly. So we need a watchdog, but we also have to make sure that the watchdog is inoculated and doesn't bite us. I think you need that balance.
We need the balance. Somebody is asking, so I'll ask you the question. How important, according to my question, is how important is a leader's personal standing relationship with other countries? I think what somebody is trying to ask is, in terms of diplomacy and international relationships, how important is it for Sri Lanka to appear to be amenable to talk to other leaders, to be receptive to what they're saying, what they're asking, what they're encouraging? How important are these relationships?
That quality is important, but it's not the most important thing.
Right.
And here, this isn't only me talking. I refer to one of the last books by Dr. Henry Kissinger. It was called On Leadership. And he wrote about those world leaders he knew, whom he respected. They range from General Charles de Gaulle of France to Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. And Henry Kissinger identified what was most important in a leader, what he commended most. And that was...
And what did dear Henry say?
Well, he said the ability to fight for, to represent and fight for the national interest of that country while skillfully navigating the global dynamics.
Okay.
So, in other words, what is most important is not to have a Rolodex of leaders you know in the world. What is most important is to have an astute grasp of the national interest of your country. Because if you don't have a grasp of the national interest, then, I mean, you could just be sort of running a kind of an international escort service just because you know people.
But also, sorry, also Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka, if you look at our troubles, our protests and so on, there's a fine line, isn't there, between democratic tolerance and slipping down this mire of that leads to an abyss known as anarchy. So it's a fine line. You have to tolerate protests and so on to a point. But I think in Sri Lanka, when our parliament was being threatened to be overrun, I think that's when the penny dropped. And so now when we look at it with hindsight and all of that, you see what happened in Kenya, you see what happened in Bangladesh. Sri Lanka didn't go down that route. Was our tolerance the right mix?
Well, for us, you've been very kind to me and introduced me as a serial ambassador, a serial diplomat. But at base, I'm a political scientist. I mean, about 3 of my degrees have been in political science. So when I answer you, I do so not only as a former diplomat, but also as a political scientist. Two things are very important. The state, and that's why I'm for the state, but I'm for an enlightened policy governing the state.
Right.
And on this side, you have the people.
Yeah.
And you have a social contract. And if we don't get the balance right, if we don't have an equilibrium, then the people will toss out the ruler and the regime, and if there is no real sensitivity to the sentiments of the people, they will toss out the state as well. Now, this was actually John Locke, one of the great theorists of the social contract, who said that if the ruler violates the contract with the ruled, then the ruled, and this is centuries ago, the ruled have the right of revolution. So it is the rulers who have to maintain the interest of the state, because without a state there will be anarchy. So therefore I am personally opposed to slashing the economic role of the state, to building bridges which make us contiguous with other countries, because we have to be careful about national sovereignty. I'm very, very opposed to that sort of recklessness. But you also have to be careful to maintain the consent of the people, the legitimacy of the people, because if they don't, if you don't, as we saw in Bangladesh, the people will rise up, and it happened in Sri Lanka in 2022. What most of us forget is that it happened in Sri Lanka in 1953. The Hartal of August 1953, where Mr. Dandit Senanayake, who had been elected in 1952, had to resign because he took some economic measures and the people rose up. 8 of them were shot by the police, but it was so powerful, so strong, that the cabinet had to meet on a British warship in Colombo Harbour. The Prime Minister resigned. He was replaced by Sir John Kotalavala, and Sir John was overrun electorally by SWRD Bandaranaike in 1956 and wound up in Kent in the United Kingdom, fox hunting. Never could come back to Sri Lanka. And so the Sri Lankan people, if things go beyond a certain threshold of tolerance, they'll toss out any ruler, whoever it is. And the military, people say, well, the government didn't shoot. But the military would have turned against the rulers at that moment during the Aragalaya.
So it appears to me in the end that Sri Lanka, as we come to the last few seconds of our program, Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka, it appears to me that Sri Lanka got its mix right.
It did. It did.
And here
the
we
balance.
are.
We got the balance right.
We got the balance
swayed
right.
this way and that, but we got the equilibrium. We got it right.
And we had some, we've had some sort of semblance of normality.
And partial stabilization, I'd call it. Yes.
And it's the time is moving closer to us moving forward.
Yes, yes.
But
indeed.
Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka, thank you ever so much for being on the Turning Point.
Thank you, Faraz.
Thank you.
Very happy to have been here.
Thank you. And that's the way it was on the Turning Point for ITN Sri Lanka. Take care and bless you all.